Hello everybody, Sorlian here, and welcome back to another mathematics video. In this video, we'll be exploring the beautiful topic of wages and salary. And at the end of this video, you should be able to do two things. One, calculate wages, and two, calculate salary. So let's head into some definitions of these two key terms that we're looking at today. The first term would be wages. Now, wages would be compensation or money that is paid based on the number of hours that you work. Salary, a fixed amount paid regularly, usually monthly regardless of the hours worked. And your salary is based on your position and so on. Whereas compared to wages, that is based on the amount of hours that you work. So let's say this is some key terms under these two topics. The first one would be hourly rate. Now, hourly rate would be the amount that you earn per hour that you work. So every hour, you earn a certain amount of money. So if you're working at a business and the business pays you $500 per hour, then that $500 is known as the hourly rate. Then the next thing that we want to touch on would be overtime. Now, overtime is the additional hours that you work beyond the normal working hour. I know in Guyana, the normal working week would be 40 hours. So as long as you work beyond 40 hours, that is considered as overtime. Or if you work on weekend, that is also considered as overtime. And you're paid an additional something to the hourly rate. The next one would be gross pay. Now the gross pay would be the total earnings before all the deductions. So before all the NIS and all these different deductions come out, that total salary there is called the gross pay. And then when all of that come out, the money that you take home, the money that you will see on your pay slip that you will take home, that is called the net pay. Now the monthly salary is a fixed payment that you get at the end of the month. And that would be a salary. An annual salary would be the total salary that you earn at the end of a year. Next, let's talk about some formulas and then we'll head into some examples. So these formulas are straightforward, but nevertheless, let's look at them. The first thing, wages. So if you want to calculate the amount of money that you make per week, of course it will be the hourly rate, which is the money that you're paid per hour, multiplied by the number of hours worked. And that is common sense. So the next one would be overtime pay. So overtime would be the overtime rate multiplied by the number of overtime hours that you work. So that you have to find what is your overtime rate. And most times overtime rate is paid at a double or a time and a half times the normal rate, and then you multiply that by the amount of overtime hours that you work. The next one would be the gross pay. Now the gross pay would be the hourly rate times the regular hours plus the overtime pay. So this is the amount of money that you make at the end of the week. You add up your normal money plus the overtime money, and that will give you the gross pay. And the next one would be gross pay, and this is referred to the monthly one, the salary. So this is the salary that you get at the end of the month. And the net pay would be the gross pay, subtract all the deductions. So now that we have an understanding of the different formulas that we use, and as you can see, all of them, they're pretty straightforward. We don't even need formulas when we want to calculate these things. We just have to look at the question and just think it through. So let's head into our first example. The first example says, a worker earns $50 per hour and works 40 regular hours per week. Calculate his earnings for the week. So we see the worker earns $50 every hour and he works 40 hours. So to find the amount of money that he works for this week, or he or she, you multiply $50 by the number of hours that you work, which would be 40. And 50 times 40 would give you $2,000. So the worker worked $2,000 after he worked 40 hours for the week for $50 per hour. And that is as easy as that. So we put this in a sentence, we can say, therefore, the worker earns $2,000. And that is our answer. That is our answer. So example 2. Example 2 says, a worker earns $15 per hour and works 40 regular hours per week. He also works 5 overtime hours at a rate of 1.5 times his regular hourly rate. So 1.5 is sometimes referred to as a time and a half. 1.5 and a time and a half, they both mean the same thing. So calculate his total earnings for the week. So we want to see how much money he earned for the week, including his overtime money. So the first things first, let's find his weekly wage, his normal wage. So his weekly wage would be equal to, so we see he earns $15 per hour, so it will be 15 multiplied by the 40 regular hours that he worked. So 15 times 40 will give us $600. So we see he earned $600 for his normal week that he worked. Now let's calculate his overtime wage. So his overtime wage would be, it's 1.5 times his normal hourly rate. So his normal hourly rate is $15. So his overtime rate would be 1.5 times the 15, which would give us $22.5 per hour. So this is the amount of money he works per hour for overtime. So, and we saw that he worked 5 hours overtime. So this will be 22.5 multiplied by 5, the 5 hours that he worked. So 22.5 times 5 would give us $112.50. So 112.5 is the same as $112.50. So we see that he made this amount of money in overtime, and he made this amount of money for his normal weekly wage. So calculate his total earnings. His total earnings would be his weekly wage, which is $600, plus his overtime wage, which is $112.50. And when we add up all of this together, we'll get $712.50. So his total earnings for the week would be $712.50 when we calculate his overtime plus his normal and we add those two together. Let's look at another example. This example says, a teacher is paid a monthly salary of $200,000. Calculate the teacher's annual salary. So we know annual salary would be her total salary, his or her total salary at the end of the year. So for this teacher, the teacher's annual salary would be the annual salary would be the $200,000 that they get a month per month multiplied by the amount of months in the year, which would be 12. So 200,000 times 12 would give us a value of $2,400,000. And this would be the teacher's annual salary. How do we multiply the monthly salary by 12? Let's carry on to the next example. Next, we want to calculate the net salary or the net pay. So this question says, a worker earns $500 per week, but deductions for taxes and benefits are $75. Calculate his net pay. So remember, the net pay or the net salary would be the amount of money after all of the deductions come out. But net pay for this factory worker would be his gross salary, which is $500, or gross wage, subtract the deductions that come out, which would be $75. So 500 subtract 75 would give us $425. And that would be this factory worker net salary. The net salary is after all deductions come out. Let's carry on to another example. So this one says, a mechanic earns $18 per hour and works 35 regular hours and 10 overtime hours in a week. His overtime rate is 2 times his regular hourly rate. if his weekly deductions total $50, calculate his net pay. So we need to work this question piece by piece. So the first thing, let's find this mechanic normal salary at the end of the month during his normal working time. So his weekly wage would be, so he works $18 per hour. This would be 18 multiplied the amount of hours that he worked, which would be 35. So 18 times 35 would give us $630. And this would be his weekly wage. So that is his weekly wage. Next, let's find the amount of money that he worked overtime. So his overtime wage would be, so we see he's paid 2 times his regular hourly rate. So we know his regular hourly rate is $18 per hour. So his overtime rate would be 2 multiplied by that. So 2 multiplied by 18 would give us so he works, instead of $18, $36 per hour in overtime. So his overtime wage would be the $36 that he makes per hour multiplied by the amount of hours in overtime that he works, which would be 10. So this would give us a total of $360 in overtime wage. So to find his net pay, we add up his overtime wage plus his weekly wage, and then we subtract the deductions. So his net pay would be the $630 plus the $360, subtract, we see that $50 that will come out of his salary every week. So this would be subtract $50. When we add up the 630, subtract the 360. So we add 630 plus 360, we will get 990, and we subtract the 50 from that, we'll end up with $940. So his net pay after we total up his overtime wage plus his weekly wage, and then we subtract the deduction, would be $940. And that is how we calculate net wage, taking into consideration overtime, weekly wage, and deductions. Now let's look at this last example. This last example says a woman's annual salary is $55,000. She has tax-free allowances totaling $15,000. She needs to pay 18% tax on her taxable income. Calculate the tax payable. Now we want to calculate how much tax this woman will pay on her salary. So we see that the woman has tax-free allowances totaling $15,000. So $15,000 from her normal salary cannot be taxed. So let's find the amount of money that can be taxed. So the taxable earnings would be after we take out the $15,000 that we cannot tax, that they cannot tax. So this would be $55,000 subtract $15,000. This will give us $40,000. So the $40,000 can be taxed. Now let's calculate how much tax she has to pay. So the tax pay will be 18%. So we know it's 18 over 100 multiplied by the 40,000. So you know this zero cancels with that zero. This zero cancels with that zero. And 18 times 400 will give us $7,200. And this is the tax payable, $7,200. After we take out the $15,000 that cannot be taxed, we see $40,000 can be taxed. And now we find 18% of this 40,000, and this will give us the tax payable. So she has to pay a tax of $7,700. And with that, it has brought us to the end of this video of calculating salary, wages, and also we looked at some tax as well. So one thing we saw in this video is that formulas, they don't play a key role in calculating salary. All we need to do is read the question carefully and just work it out from there, work it step by step. So if you want to find a weekly wage, we just take the money that is made per hour and we multiply it by the number of hours worked. If you want to calculate the overtime wage, we first find the overtime rate, which would be the amount of money you make per hour in overtime. So if it's double, if the normal rate is $20 per hour and in overtime you're paid double that, the 20 times 2 will give you $40 per hour in overtime. And then you just multiply that by the number of overtime hours worked. And then of course we went to deductions. If you want to find the net pay that an employee will make or that a person will make, you take the gross salary and you subtract the deductions, and then that will give you the net pay, the money that they actually take home. So I trust that you now have a good understanding of wages and salary, and I'll see you in the next video.